All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Keith Owens. We're here once again with another episode of DSQ Live. We get a chance to talk to some of the guest authors who've appeared in our pages. And tonight, we're really happy to welcome Reuben Munday, who appeared in our second edition, and actually be a third edition because it was our inaugural edition. And then, there was an inaugural edition 1 and 3. Because the third, so third edition. And I had a great story called Sep's Homecoming. And so, for those who don't know Detroit Stories, quarterly, of course, we come out as the title implies every season. And so we're just trying to provide about 4 or 5 stories every issue. And our intent is basically we have mostly alternative fiction, science fiction, some straight fiction. And the intent is always just to kind of examine and look at Detroit from an alternate lens, because we've all familiar with all the different narratives that have gone on throughout the years about our city, one way or another. But one thing we don't have too much of is just looking at it, I think, through science fiction alternative lens, which I think gives us a little bit more leeway to look at how things are and how we think things are, and just as in a broad lens as possible. And one of the things that we always, in addition to the stories we write and we ask our contributors to write, I mean, we give as wide a range as possible. The main thing is to always make sure just that it's connected to Detroit. That's the only thing that we ask, because this is Detroit Stories Quarterly, so all our stories are connected in some way, not to Detroit. And to date, all of our guest authors, except for one, who was from Indiana, are from Detroit. We open submissions to anybody who'd like to submit who may or may not be from Detroit, but we try to keep everything focused as much in Detroit as possible. And with all that, I'll move on and I'll hand it over to Doc to get us started with this episode.
All right. Well, Reuben, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And I have to formally, because we communicate by the whole cyberspace thing, but thank you formally for your piece. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And it's perfectly okay. You weren't prepared for this, but what I'd like you to do is to give our audience just a brief summary about what Sep's Homecoming is about, and then I've got some things I want to lead us into and discussing it. But just give us kind of a synopsis of it.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me, number one, and thank you for publishing the story. I appreciate it. You guys know how ideas just come to you. I can't explain exactly how, but things start haunting you and you have to write a story about them. Mm-hmm. Well, I think 2 impulses drove this. One was me trying to recreate the excitement at the old downtown YMCA when a major jazz figure was coming to town. The old Detroit YMCA was demolished when the new Tiger Stadium came in. It was on Witherell near the Detroit College of Law. Mm-hmm. But it was a place where businessmen gathered, everything from men from the plant to judges like Judge Keith, to lawyers, but all walks of life. So everything going on in Detroit came through the Businessmen's Club. Mm-hmm. So the language, I just distilled the language that went on in the club. I didn't try to describe the club itself, because that would be another story altogether. Mm-hmm. And then in terms of the character, Sep, I was thinking about the cultural leadership of prominent jazz musicians in the community and why that is. And I think our great jazz musicians have the ultimate artistic license in that they are not playing by the rules that normal working people play by, they're free to deal with impulse, they're playing in an idiom that is in the moment, and which I think speaks to life in America, particularly in the African-American community, and trying to respond beautifully in the present and with others. And so this guy, Giuseppe Patterson, is something of a hero. It's to the community. It's not clear exactly why, but our jazz musicians, our great jazz musicians, are leaders. It's not clear whether it's spiritual, whether it's political. It's not biblical, even though some of them were religious, but I think they represent a certain freedom to the community as people. I tried to reflect that in the story with Giuseppe's relationship with women. That's unusual, a kind of rebellious person going into the club underage and not doing what his brother told him to do. Just a certain freedom that I think a lot of us dream about, particularly people who get up 9 to 5, go to work, the normal rules. So artistically, the jazz musician, I think, is high up in the hierarchy culturally. I'll just say this, and then I don't want to go on too long, but I think one of the things that's another freedom that the jazz artist has is that he doesn't have to be verbal, like a writer. So you can't box in a John Coltrane or Thelonious Monk. You can't nail them down to words. You can only either feel or not feel what they're expressing to you. So it takes creativity on your part as well as theirs to listen, because your imagination is required. And then, of course, these cultural figures have always been suspect because they are so free. Sometimes it's because of substance. Sometimes it's because historically it's attracted an interracial, international community. Many times people who don't normally come together around this music for reasons that we can't easily explain. Many times it's a problem the wrong women come around and are attracted to this music. So that's a lot to say, but the story tries to recreate the excitement of this cultural figure who's from Detroit. This is totally made up by me. From Detroit, so he's representing us. He's made a name for himself all over the world. He has this freedom, and we're intrigued by how free he is, but at the same time, the beauty, the beauty that he has taken into the world to represent Detroit. Now, I made up the story, but I can name some jazz musicians from Detroit who've done that. That kind of thing. People like Ron Carter. I could name quite a few.
Well,
but
I want to pick that up right where we are right now, because the thing that struck me, because I think shortly after Keith had received your piece, he had sent it to me, and you know, the title intrigued me, and what struck me and what drew me right in was the fact that it began with this ongoing dialogue going on, and it was like a fly in the room kind of dialogue, And I said, oh, this brother he's been listening to conversations that people have. And I mean, it was gritty. It was, and it was, in real time. I'm wondering now, because you set a wonderful kind of mood and atmosphere in the piece throughout. Um, have you been an astute observer of when it came to listening to how people talk and in certain areas and all of that, and particularly even in jazz clubs and things like that? Was that something that you've been able to kind of, as a detached kind of way, listen and study that, or was this just kind of organic? It just kind of came into the story just as you were writing it.
Well, I've been interested in language a long time. I was an English major
Okay.
as an undergrad. I, I've studied literature.
Mm-hmm.
Before I became a lawyer, I was undergrad and graduate school, literature and reading.
Okay.
But in terms of our language in Detroit, I had one of my friends comment on how raw the language is. But if you've been in a gym in Detroit,
Yeah.
it just wouldn't be real if it wasn't raw like that.
Yeah.
With what you know about the people who are in the gym. But I'm a gym rat too.
Mm-hmm.
So I enjoy sitting and listening. And then I'm originally a Southerner.
Okay.
From Tuskegee.
All right.
And I'm very interested in Southern dialogue, and some of my other stories, which won't appear in Detroit Quarterly because they're about the South and Tuskegee.
Okay.
I deal with the language, the original language of people from our culture who are not allowed to read, so who are imitating what they hear of a language that they really don't understand. And you can do some interesting things creatively with that.
Yeah.
The mispronunciations, the misunderstanding of meaning, which ultimately changes meaning.
Yeah.
Because language is just what you and I understand it to be. So if we don't read it, but are just imitating what we hear, we may have a different meaning than what's in the dictionary. So
Yeah.
To answer your question, I've had a long interest in language, and then I'm a lawyer, so law is a language, but it's a more restrictive language, and I enjoy the freedom of the creative process and balancing out that analytical side of writing with the more intuitive, us listening to each other, us hearing each other, us experiencing things together. All of this is connected, but there are different sides of the brain that you're using more of one side than the other for one kind of thinking than the other.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm very interested in language, and particularly unconventional language.
I think that comes too. I think that's the reason why I like the story so much. Also, was because you had mentioned somebody commented about the the rawness of the language, and I've had the same thing, with stuff that I write, But I think, and that kind of leads my question in terms of your writing process. I know when I write, I mean, I was telling Doc, it's almost like I'm transcribing at some point. It's like the character, and I'm just pretty much saying what they told me. And And when you hear that, like you said, where the characters in the gym, I used to go to the Y downtown Y at Witherell too. Right after I first
Yeah.
moved to Detroit, I was,
Mhm.
so I know exactly,
Right.
that, and then and obviously I'm a musician, so I've been in all, the clubs.
Right.
So that, there's no way in the world you can
Right.
write that and say thee and thou. It's just
Right.
that's not going to fit in that area. But
That's right.
and I think that but I wonder if you could just talk more. I mean, about your writing, your writing process in terms of, like you said, the obvious, stories, we don't all know where they come from. But once they come, how do you write? And how do you go about putting your story together?
Yeah. Well, for years, I had a process because I had a heavy legal practice. I always have a notebook with me
Mhm.
when the ideas come. I'm sure you can relate to this, and it might not even be a story yet. It might be an impression or some thoughts that start haunting me enough that I'll write those thoughts down. And then for years, you may remember in Ferndale, there was a place, Paperbacks Unlimited,
Oh yeah.
and right down the street was a place called Rialto, a restaurant. So every Sunday I would go paperbacks and get the New York Times and then go write. And it got to the point where the waitresses knew to put me in a corner because I'd just sit there for hours writing and composing stories based on these notes I had written.
Mhm.
Now, a lot of the stories, some of the stories were before I got to Detroit. But because of my business practice, my process had to be piecemeal. And to get out of the corporate head and the legal head, I like to go to coffee shops. It's a way of being around people, but not being with them.
Yeah.
Barnes and Noble, and just sit. Once Rialto closed, I'd go to different bookstores, usually a Barnes and Noble somewhere, and being around the books in the bookstore puts me in a frame of mind. And then you had students in there studying, and you can watch people, and no one will lock you up for being crazy for just staring into space for long periods of time. But also the quiet, the privacy of dealing with your own thoughts, being haunted by your own thoughts and ideas is a very wonderful thing, I think, and a very therapeutic thing. And both of you are writers, so you know that probably if you write, you have to write. I mean, you have to.
Absolutely.
It has to. It's going to come out some way.
Yeah.
You're either writing or you're frustrated that you're not
writing.
doing it. So, so I know you both can relate to that. So we all had these little scraps of paper around with all these ideas on them.
Hey, listen. What I do, Reuben, is I've learned to keep some Scotch tape with me because I mean, hey guys, it works. Because for a long, you ever had that experience when all of the pieces are everywhere and you're like, dang, I wrote something on something. But now I keep some Scotch tape around, and I have this. My wife just looks at me and she just shakes her head. But it's a nice little web. Everything's put together. And then I can sit down from that because it's cohesive.
Right.
But let me ask you, kind of picking up on where Keith was going with that. And, narrative. The whole concept of narrative is very important. It's one of the cornerstones in communication theory and all of that sort of thing. But and there's a lot of literature out there that talks about the importance of storytelling. But why do you, Reuben, see a value in storytelling? And you can and certainly as, you know, a man of African ancestry, and, you know, and you have this rich history yourself. But why are stories still, why are they so important to us now?
Well, we are our stories.
Okay.
And if we're not our stories, what are we, you know? And I think writing your stories is a heroic thing, because when I read a good story that you thought of, I see things in it that I felt, but you articulated them and I didn't. And it enriches me.
Yeah.
And then the way we interact socially is limiting in terms of the formalities that keep you from fully expressing yourself. Just, for example, just having the good manners to not just talk and listen to the other person too, and hear what they have to say. Well, you can dispense with all of that when you're writing, because you are giving everything you have to it without regard. In fact, I'm giving you your words too in my story. I'm being you and me and Keith, and it's costing me, if I'm being honest. The heroic part is it's costing me because I'm exposing myself.
Yeah.
I can't hide behind a title. I can't hide behind money, what kind of car I drive. You can see things. You can see things in what I've written that maybe I didn't even mean to show you, you know.
Right.
So I think it's one of the reasons I admire writers and hold writers in such high regard, and always wanted at some level to be a writer myself. It's just the ultimate in giving of yourself and sharing some of your life with other people.
Yeah.
And when we look at people, the writings of people who've passed on, it's just an amazing thing that you're in the mind of a person
Exactly.
who lived a long time ago, who's not here anymore, and you're actually captured by that person's mind for a while. So I think it's important. In the African American community, we haven't been free to do it, to express ourselves because of the repercussions. I think that's why sometimes there's so much symbolism. You know, the blues is always very understated verbally.
Yeah.
And you know there's more going on that the words are saying. And then with the jazz, it's often nonverbal. So there's a lot to do. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot, what went on in the movement. What was it like in the church when the little girls got blown up? What was the feeling?
Yeah.
What were the families like? Hurricane Katrina, some of those experiences, the writers who were there, we need those stories, you know. We need those lived stories, not a newscast, but actual, here's where my sister was, here's where my brother was, here's where my mother was, here's how I felt. It's really, I think, a gift to the world, not to exaggerate too much, but you can tell I just hold it in high regard, and I enjoy. I'm a big reader. My mother was an English teacher at Tuskegee, so I was just, brought up devouring books. So, um,
I have to, I mentioned to Keith, I wanted to share this. I had a wonderful friend and mentor coming up as a writer when I had my time at the Michigan Chronicle as a reporter and then an editor. I worked with Danton Wilson, who went on to become a Wayne County prosecutor. But during his time there, he was going to law school and what have you. And I really came to admire how individuals who pursue the law career are very hardcore writers. I mean, there's a certain discipline. I really learned a lot about the importance of the discipline of legal writing and so forth. Having worked with Danton, and then later I worked in Lansing. I worked in the legislature for a while, and I got to meet more lawyers. And so I'm saying all of that to say that if we have some of our people in our audience who are attorneys or maybe pursuing a career, and maybe they also like to write like you, can you assure people that they can do both?
Oh, yeah.
And be successful in both. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I think it's important to do both. It's very easy to get out of touch with yourself as a lawyer because people are looking at the title. They're asking very few questions of you because they want you to help them with their problems. They're not necessarily seeing you. You're getting credit for things you may or may not deserve. Maybe you can help them, maybe you can't, but when people are in need and you're there to help, you're in a powerful position and you're not being questioned. So one of the reasons you get some of the arrogance in the professions is because you're not being asked some of these questions. Who are you? Do you have any empathy? Do you feel things for other people? Are you just here to collect money? Or do you do anything in the community? When you're not facing hard questions, you have to ask those questions yourself. And trying to write is a good way to face up to some of them and not necessarily talking about them because we can't talk about our clients' cases, but it is a way of digging into yourself. Okay, well, behind this title, who is it? Who am I? How do I remember who I was before I became this? What am I in addition to this? And so it's a lot cheaper than a psychiatrist, I might add. And some would say some of the results are better, but that's that's a case-by-case basis.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, I want to ask you real quick, because I know we're almost coming to the conclusion. I don't have to end right on the minute, but in terms of asking who am I, et cetera, I know it's on your story, because your title says, by Brus Munday. And I just want to talk about why you wanted to use that name as opposed to Reuben. What's behind that?
Well, as I told you, I'm a Southern boy, and if you ask people I grew up with in Tuskegee, if you know Reuben Munday, say, no, I know Brus Munday, but I don't know Reuben Munday.
Okay.
So I went to prep school like you did, Keith. So when I left Tuskegee, my real name was used, so I became Reuben. But I wasn't Reuben until I left Tuskegee, because all Southern Black boys get nicknamed. And my father and my sister nicknamed me Brus. So I think my writing's really more about Brus than about Reuben, because that was originally the way I thought of myself. I didn't have any degrees. I didn't have any, I was just Brus, you know.
Right.
And so that's just Brus writing that story. You know?
Wow. And I guess because we need to wrap up, but and I could spend another hour with you, brother. I mean, just talking to you, very rich history that you bring.
Thank you.
So, your favorite jazz artist? And I know that's hard. That's hard. I know for me it is, because I start with Train, but then I you know, I have a local guy whose work I love, Wendell Harrison, and Freedom Underground also. But
I love Train. I like Pharaoh Sanders.
Okay.
McCoy Tyner, Detroit's own Ron Carter. Beautiful brother, right out of Cass Tech. Really from Ferndale, but went to Cass Tech. I got to meet him. He not too long ago got an honorary doctorate from the University of Michigan.
Okay.
I was really happy about that. But those are my favorites. I love the straight ahead jazz, acoustic jazz. I know you like a lot of electricity, Keith.
Oh yeah, I like the power, low voltage.
Exactly.
You know, but that's why, like I said, my favorite's always been Miles. But I think,
I like Miles.
Yeah, I love Miles, and I think that when he brought before and after, I mean, but when he brought the, you know, for two reasons. One, because of the fusion, he brought the electricity in, which really, because my thing was always, you know, if you go to a blues club, what's the symbol? It's a guitar. You go to a jazz club, what's a horn? Okay.
Yeah.
And I said, because in jazz, the horns have all the fun. To me, and I said, you know, they don't let the guitar rip. I mean, I love Kenny Burke, but it has to be more understated, you know. But I think, so I like to rip. But the other reason why I always love Miles is because I you know, my three favorite musicians are Miles, Jimi Hendrix, and George Clinton. You know, and I like Miles because Miles came from a middle class background too. You know. And I felt, and always, because, you know, they always said you had to be, you know, broke and poor and all this stuff. And Miles came up, you know, and I said, oh, here's somebody who didn't, you know, because I couldn't, who went to the front. And now it made me feel like, okay, I can belong in this. I can have a part.
Right.
You know, he came from some, you know, something similar as well, you know. But
well, you know, I think for our young people, that's a mistake. Everybody has this down and out story, but Julian Bond's father, Julian Bond founded SNCC. Julian Bond's father was president of Lincoln, and his father was friends with Albert Einstein. Kathleen Cleaver, Eldridge's wife, went to boarding school at George School, grew up in Tuskegee with me, went to Oberlin, has a Yale law degree. Gil Scott Heron went to Felston School, got a master's from Johns Hopkins. I mean, it's a mistake, man. I mean, Stokely Carmichael went to the Bronx High School of Science. I mean, these were some heavy people with educated backgrounds, and our kids need to know it because
they perpetrate that image. It's like they want to put that on, and it's limiting, you know. Not that they try to put us in a box. And I said one of my favorite things from Miles was when he was asked that same thing Harry Reason, I think, was asking about that, you know, that you need to come from this kind of stuff. And Miles said my daddy was rich and my mama was good looking. You know, you know, and it was just, you know, you can say just
Miles.
Miles told Johnny Carson, walked off Johnny Carson show and said, "You just don't know how to talk to a black man." You know? But see, that's that cultural, the freedom. You know, if you have a job or if you're worried about the repercussions at work and but that's the excitement, you know, about these guys.
That's right.
And it's just all about the music. Sonny Rollins, oh my God. that's another cultural hero.
Yeah, absolutely.
But these guys keep us going. They keep us alive, you know. And
Really
but
Yes, sir.
yeah, it's
no, this is great. I almost said actually we could go so long, because this has been a phenomenal conversation, man. But thanks so much for your story, and I hope you bring
absolutely.
that one to us eventually. You know, I know you, like I said, we love to see some more from you. But thanks, and also thanks for this great conversation and for participating in DSQ Live. We really appreciate it. Yeah,
Absolutely. I appreciate being on.
absolutely. Doc,
Take care. We'll talk soon.
we sure will.
All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See you
All right.
guys.
Good night,
Take
everyone.
care.
Good night.
All right.